Rachel pushed the heavy wooden door. Dust motes danced in the single ray of sunlight piercing the attic's gloom. The air was thick with the smell of mothballs and forgotten things. She stepped inside, her heart pounding with a childlike thrill of exploration. Her grandmother's attic was a treasure trove of memories, each item holding stories from a time long past. Rachel's gaze swept over the dusty trunks and cobweb-draped furniture. Then she saw it. Nestled in the corner, perched upon a chipped porcelain washstand, sat a doll. It was not the kind of doll Rachel was accustomed to seeing. It wasn't bright and cheerful, but instead it possessed an eerie stillness that drew her in. Cautiously, Rachel approached the doll. Its porcelain skin was smooth and cold. The doll was dressed in a faded blue gown, its lace trim yellowed with age. But it was the doll's eyes that truly captivated Rachel. They were large and luminous, crafted with an unnerving realism that made Rachel feel as if the doll was watching her every move. Rachel carefully lifted the doll from its perch. It was heavier than she expected, and as she held it in her arms, a shiver ran down her spine. The attic seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper, as if the doll's presence had awakened something unsettling within the old house. The doll's presence was unsettling, yet Rachel couldn't bring herself to put it down. Its eyes seemed to follow her every move, their glassy surface reflecting the dim light of the attic. There was a strange allure to the doll, a silent plea for attention that Rachel couldn't ignore. Back in her room, Rachel dusted the doll and placed it on her bedside table. The doll's presence seemed to change the atmosphere of the room. The shadows seemed to deepen, and the silence was punctuated by an almost imperceptible chill. Rachel tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to her overactive imagination. As the day wore on, Rachel couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Every time she glanced at the doll, it seemed as if its gaze had shifted slightly. The luminous eyes seemed to pierce through her, their unnerving realism sending shivers down her spine. That night, as Rachel lay in bed, she could feel the weight of the doll's stare upon her. She tried to ignore it, burying her face in her pillow, but the feeling persisted. It was as if the doll was aware, its presence growing stronger with every passing moment. The next morning, Rachel awoke to a strange sound. It was a soft whisper, barely audible but distinct enough to send a chill down her spine. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding in her chest, and listened intently. The whisper came again, a faint, ethereal sound that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. As the day progressed, strange occurrences plagued Rachel. Objects would move inexplicably, a book falling from a shelf with a loud thud, a vase toppling over despite the absence of any breeze. Whispers followed her, faint and fleeting, just at the edge of her hearing. They seemed to come from the shadows, from the very air itself, whispering her name in hushed, urgent tones. One evening, as Rachel sat reading in the living room, she heard the distinct sound of tiny footsteps padding across the wooden floor above her. It sounded like a child was running back and forth, their steps light and quick. But when she went to investigate, the hallway was empty. The footsteps ceased as abruptly as they had begun, leaving behind an eerie silence that pressed against her ears. That night, Rachel lay awake, her body rigid with fear. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss, that an unseen presence had invaded the house. The whispers seemed louder now, circling her bed like vultures, and the air was thick with an oppressive, almost tangible dread. Suddenly, Rachel felt a weight on her chest, a cold, heavy pressure that made it difficult to breathe. She opened her eyes, her gaze drawn to the bedside table. The doll was gone. Panic surged through her as she slowly turned her head, her heart pounding against her ribs. There, perched on her chest, was the porcelain doll. Its glassy eyes, now wide and malevolent, stared down at her with a chilling intensity. One cold porcelain hand pressed against her throat, its tiny fingers digging into her skin. Rachel let out a strangled cry, her body frozen in terror. Mustering all her strength, Rachel flung the doll across the room. She scrambled out of bed, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and stumbled towards the door. She didn't look back, didn't dare to see if the doll was following her. All she could think about was escaping the suffocating grip of fear that had taken hold of her. Rachel fled into the night, leaving behind the house and the doll that had haunted her. She never returned, the memory of that night forever etched into her mind. The porcelain doll remained, its glassy eyes fixed on the empty house, a silent, sinister sentinel standing watch over the secrets it held within its cold porcelain heart.